Now it's time to hear from our special guest speaker. Dr. Obiageli, or Obi, Ezekwesili, is a senior economic advisor at Open Society Foundations. She also jointly serves as senior economic advisor for the Africa Economic Development Policy Initiative. In these roles, she advises 9 reform-committed African heads of state, including Paul Kagame of Rwanda and Ellen Johnson Sirleaf of Liberia. Before joining Open Society Foundation, she was vice president of the World Bank Africa region, responsible for operations in 48 countries and a lending portfolio of nearly $40 billion. From 2002 to 2007, she worked for the federal government of Nigeria as Minister of Education, Minister of Solid Minerals, head of the Budget Monitoring and Price Intelligence Unit, as well as chairperson of the Nigeria Extractive Industries Transparency Initiative, where she led the first ever national implementation of the global standards and principles of transparency in the oil, gas, and mining sectors. She was a key member of President Obasanjo's economic team. For the prior 2 years, she was at the Center for International Development at Harvard University as director of the Harvard Nigeria Economic Strategy Program, working with Professor Jeffrey Sachs. Dr. Ezekwesili is a chartered accountant and holds an MA in International Law and Diplomacy from the University of Lagos, as well as an MA in Public Policy and Administration from the Kennedy School of Government, Harvard University. She trained as a chartered accountant consultant with the global firm of Akintola Williams, Deloitte and Touche, and worked in senior management positions in the financial services sector. Dr. Ezekwesili is a founding director of Transparency International, representing Africa at the global anti-corruption body based in Berlin. She serves on numerous international boards. In 2012, she was awarded an honorary Doctor of Science degree by the University of Agriculture, Abeokuta in Nigeria. She has also been awarded the Nigerian National Honor of the Commander of the Order of the Federal Republic. Dr. Ezekwesili has been the force behind the Bring Back Our Girls campaign and stands in solidarity with the parents at Abuja's Unity Fountain to demand the return of the Chibok girls. She was recently named by the New Africa magazine as one of the most influential Africans of 2014. We're honored to have you here.
Hello. Thank you so very much, Nancy. And thank you, Temitope, Professor Teriela. I said to him that he's made my life a lot easier because he provided very important context. And as I was taught in policy school, context is everything. Wow, you guys were wonderful with that performance. I didn't see any nerves. Weren't they great? Yeah. Thank you so much. I want to thank the students, the faculty, and other members of this society who are gathered in this room tonight. And to especially thank the university for this very important global week of events that really bring, it really brings the whole world into your space, right? And that's the way to go. No society can survive in insularity anymore. Any society that's not preparing people to understand the diversity of our world is a society living in denial. When Tom Friedman said the world is flat, he actually didn't realize how flat it really is. So thank you very much for the opportunity of the interaction. Earlier this morning, I spent some time with younger people And it was so much fun to see the energy and the excitement in their eyes to embrace the world. We do need to build generations that are remaining optimistic about solving the problems that we are going to be leaving behind. So thank you. I come with plenty of pain resulting from the topic of our discussion. As you already or may not be aware, the Chibok girls, who are the reason that we started the advocacy globally known as the bringbackourgirls movement, are still not back. And by already in Nigeria, it is Friday. And so in our counting, it would be day 290 of these girls being abducted forcibly from their dormitory and not rescued. You've asked me to speak on human rights in Nigeria and the Bring Back Our Girls advocacy. I still would like to give some context to the larger issues of Nigeria. Nigeria, as you probably know, is the largest country in Africa by population. It's a country of 170 million people, as estimated since the last census. It's a country that recently rebased its economy and ended up overtaking South Africa as the largest economy in Africa with a little over $500 billion, and currently occupies the 26th position in the scale of economies around the world. Nigeria has an income per capita of about $2,500. Nigeria is a country of interesting economic indicators, whereas it is a country that is hugely endowed in minerals, particularly oil. It is an important member of OPEC, but it's also a country of paradoxes. And so despite the significant oil revenue that Nigeria has generated in the more than 5 decades of the discovery of oil, we, as of the last poverty estimate in the country by the National Bureau of Statistics, it's a country with about 69% in the poverty bracket. So there is huge inequality. The Gini coefficient that measures inequality is pretty high because it's slightly, nearly 4.4. With serious challenges that mostly speak to something that Tokwe said, which is the capacity of the state. Nigeria is a country that's had very serious history of governance challenges. Nigeria became independent in 1960, October 1960, and so it's 54 years post-independence. And of that 54-year period, it is only about 25 years that Nigeria has been governed democratically. The rest of the years, nearly about 30 of it, Nigeria was governed by military rule. And the context is important because with military governance, the issues of human rights and human rights abuse take a totally different perspective. And so for 30 years, on an accumulated basis, was a country that was subjected to tyrannical approach to the social contract between citizens and the state. Of course, Nigeria, by becoming independent and having its own constitution, enshrined the articles of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights of the United Nations, 1948. And so the Constitution, most recent one, 1999 Constitution, establishes clearly the right of the citizen. Every social, political, economic right, human right that is contained within the Universal Declaration is enshrined in its entirety, indivisible, complete, and interconnected to all other rights in our Constitution. However, the major challenge was and has always been the respect of those rights. So, enough of the context. On the 14th of April, 2014, as part of the incidents of bomb blasts that Professor Toriola spoke about, which had become no longer extraordinary incidents at that time. There was a major one on the outskirts of the federal capital, Abuja. And it was really a shocking one because the activities of Boko Haram had mostly been, there had been bomb blasts in Abuja and close enough to Abuja. But for a very long time, there wasn't any such. But during that week, the week before that bomb blast in Abuja, there had been so many ratcheting up of bomb blasts in the Northeast. And then Abuja happened that morning. And it jarred the nerves because the Boko Haram at that point were no longer just bombing. They were beginning to send a message of fear and dread. And the way the bombs were going off seemed to suggest that they had it all under their own domain. And, they decided where they wanted to bomb, they successfully bombed it. And so the focus for me as an individual on that 14th of April was, this is too much. Citizens are too complacent. These bombs are going off. The only thing we're hearing from government is a condemnation of the attacks, and then nothing until the next bomb would go off. And I thought, and citizens cannot be so disconnected while all this was happening. And so, as someone who is very much prolific on the social media, especially my Twitter handle, I tweeted and I said, it has become imperative for citizens to be interested in understanding and having full information on what exactly is going on. The worst thing that can happen to citizens of any nation is to not be interested in the things that happen around them. And so I more or less awoke people to the reality that they needed we all needed to be interested and to demand for information. So I put out a hashtag saying, if any one of you has an idea, a solution to terrorism, can you please use this hashtag and tweet your idea? It was a way of at least, how do the psychologists capture this now? I think it's almost like a coping strategy. So I wanted to have other people engaged in this conversation. And as I did that, it was like people were waiting to get an opportunity to express what they were feeling and what they were thinking. And so people began to tweet at me. And the tweeting of Citizens' Solution to End Terrorism just carried on all through that day after the Abuja bomb blast. Until about, the evening time, we were almost 1,000 tweets of Citizen Solutions. And then we went to bed and continued the next day seeing people tweeting, not having realized that on that same day as we went to bed, that something tragic had happened in Borno State. We didn't know. There was no domestic news. It wasn't until the afternoon of the next day, being the 15th, that I saw the news from BBC on my timeline saying that over 100 girls had been abducted from a secondary school in Borno State. And I thought, that's strange. How can more than 100 girls abducted? So I tweeted it and asked my followers on Twitter if anybody had picked up any such news. And I got reactions of people saying, yes, they had heard that a thing like that had happened. So I got really alarmed. And then I thought, if BBC reported this, they've got quality control that would forbid them to go to press with something they were not sure enough about. So that scared me even more. And I tried to get our local media to verify the information by tweeting at them and saying, are you picking this up? Not a word. I just kept tweeting all day the 15th. The 16th, I kept tweeting, wanting to make sure that the news was being amplified through my handle. Not a word. I think it was not until the 16th that, or perhaps the 17th, that the military came out with an announcement saying there had been abduction of girls from a secondary school in Borno, but they had rescued all of them except 8. And I thought, wow, this is great. As someone who was so morbid with fear, I thought, this is so great. And I celebrated the Nigerian military on my Twitter handle, except that I celebrated too soon. Because as I put out that news and amplified the information of rescue, then words began to come of parents not having found their children yet. And then the state government, and then the school principal. And before you knew it, it was clear that something was not adding up. No word from the military until the next day. That next day, the military recanted and said they had gotten a wrong information from their base in Borno State. What an embarrassment. I couldn't live that down. Some young people had actually cautioned me not to celebrate when I celebrated the news of rescue. And I thought, how can young people of this generation be so jaded that they can't even trust the most important institution that holds a nation state? I mean, it's like a Canadian young person doubting what the military said it has done. I don't know whether it happens here. But for me, I didn't think we had reduced. Our military was not always the best, especially considering what I told you, 30 years of military rule. However, to say that girls had been rescued when they hadn't been rescued seemed to me like, no. But it happened. And so when they recanted, we didn't have much time to dwell on who did anything wrong. Simply carried on and said, let's support our military. They must go after these terrorists and they must get these girls back. At that point in time, we didn't even know that it wasn't 129 girls we were looking for. Then began the long story of how many are these girls really, what's their identity, and it became really absurd that we did not have a quick database that could tell us the children who had been taken from their school system, pointing to the issue of state capacity again. For many days after the military recanted, I kept tweeting. At that point in time, I had a hashtag, where are our 85 daughters? That was because based on the recanting statement of the military, they did say there were 108 girls or something like that, and that 20-something of them had escaped on their own. And so there were some 85 still missing. And so I did a hashtag, where are our 85 daughters? And so every day I used that to tweet, to keep attention on the girls as the start of that advocacy. From that 18th, 19th, not a word anymore. Not a word from the federal government, not a word from the military. The 20th, the 21st, the 22nd, the 23rd. On the 23rd, I was a key person at the event inaugurating one of the cities in Nigeria known as Port Harcourt as the World Book Capital, as under the UNESCO auspices. And as a book event, I thought this is the most important stage that we had to escalate the focus on these girls, on whom we were not hearing anything. So at the event, I rose and asked, together with the young woman who directs the book club that I chair the board, Coco, and we asked the audience, just like you are here today, and it was a live broadcast event on television. We asked the audience, as well as people at home, to rise in solidarity with the Chibok girls and to demand that our government should bring back our daughters. and that they must rescue these girls. As a Minister of Education in 2006, one of the major areas of focus for my time leading our education sector was the matter of girl-child education. Girl-child education, as we know, is important for cohesion in any society. The disparity between girls in school and boys in school can set the stage for deepening inequality in societies. Societies where girls go to school are often societies that have better economic outcomes. Societies where girls go to school have higher household incomes. Societies where girls go to school produce more than societies where girls are kept away from school. Societies that educate their girls have less social problems of intergenerational poverty. Societies where girls go to school are simply smart societies, because an investment in the girl child is smart economics. It's that simple. If you want to produce and produce better than your neighbor, you maximize all your factors of production. If you've got a population where 50% are females and you don't enable 50% of your population to be the best that they can be, and you instead concentrate on 50% of your potential factor of production, no matter how optimal your use of 50%, it will never give you 100% productivity. And so it is just basic economics to make sure that girls go to school. And so as a Minister of Education at that time, in Borno State, as part of the Northeast, they had the lowest enrollment levels in the country in general, but even lower presence of girls in school. And so we targeted our intervention at the federal level toward the Northeast zone and the North more broadly. So for me, it was absolutely unacceptable that this number of girls would go to school and be abducted, and the nation state was not acting as swiftly and as responsibly as it should do. So it was an advocacy that I was never going to shy away from. Secondly, before the abduction of the Chibok girls, 2 months before, in February, 59 boys had been brutally murdered in their school by Boko Haram in Bunin Yadi, also in the Northeast. And when they were killed, there was outrage and then silence. A few women came out on the street and protested and said, why would this happen? What is the reason that this happened at all? And how was the government going to ensure that there would not be a recurrence of such tragedy in schools for one day? And after that, silence. And the society simply moved on. I recall that this was a period that I was away from the country in one of the countries where I functioned as an advisor to their president. And I thought to myself, this is so sad. 59 boys went to school, were brutally murdered and burnt to death, and our society simply moved on. And I thought, this is a dangerous trend. And so with the Chibok girls, I wasn't going to simply move on like we did in the past. And so, as I asked everyone to stand in solidarity with the girls, a young follower on Twitter tweeted and said, Auntie Obi, that's what they call me. Auntie Obi has asked every one of us to join in demanding, bring back our girls, bring back our daughters. And I sat back and I tweeted and I said, everyone out there, join us. Begin to demand, bring back our girls. That's how come the social media hashtag, bring back our girls, started and became prolific. 24th, we were tweeting. 25th, we were tweeting. 26th, 27th, 28th, still no word. 29th, 30th, no word. But on the 30th, we had a major turning point. A young woman, Hadiza Bala Usman, had reached out to a number of us and said, perhaps women should go out on the street so that physically people would see that we are standing with these girls and their families. And so we called out through social media and all kinds of platforms to people and said, if you want to stand with the Chibok girls, come out to the Unity Fountain at 3 p.m. on 30th of April. And people responded. And that began a massive movement. And that movement still stands up until today. Because every day, for the last 287 days, we have not failed to stand with the Chibok girls at the Unity Fountain, engaged in one form of activism on their behalf or the other. In the course of this advocacy, what have we learned about human rights? What we have learned is that the key tenet of human right is the dignity of the human life. The dignity of the human life is the reason that the United States, for example, says that all men are created equal. In our Constitution, we also state as such. But an expression is different from the reality and the practice of that expression. And so, in the abduction of the Chibok girls and the way that the nation state responded to them, we found inequality in the protection of right. Kidnapping had always happened in Nigeria. kidnapping for ransom purposes in places like the Niger Delta. Whenever those kidnapping happened, they either happened to expatriates in the oil industry, or they happened to elite in our society. One feature was always the quick activation of all the paraphernalia of the state to go in hot pursuit of the kidnappers, or to engage them in a negotiation process for immediate release of the victims. In the case of our Chibok girls, from what I have just said to you, there was not even an admission of the fact that these girls had been abducted. The sociological interpretation is very easy. These are the daughters of the lowest income group of the society. So, human rights, when it discriminates the socio-economic political status of the individual as a victim, is no longer consistent with the unalloyed interpretation of the fact that every human being has a right to life and a right to freedom, which is not subjected to any other interpretation other than that simple interpretation. They have that right simply because they are human beings, not because they are men or women, not because they are rich or poor, not because they are white or black. They are human. So they are bequeathed with inalienable right to life. We failed the Chibok girls in protecting their right to life. The second thing that we learned is that in a society which over time had never really engaged and questioned the nation state and its failures, it was harder to sustain the momentum of that scrutiny of the nation state in its failure of the Chibok girls. So, what then happened was, with our movement standing as a means of amplification of the voice of these girls which had been taken away from them, and the weaker voices of their parents, which was not considered of any importance, many in the society thought, why are these people challenging the government? They did not see that it was not about challenging the government. It was about playing our civic duty as citizens to use our voice to demand that government must perform its responsibility. And so that's the issue of demand for accountability. Whether it is in a society like Canada, more advanced in every sense of the word than Nigeria, or it is in Nigeria, the citizens who do not understand the power of demand for accountability are simply going to be nothing better than robots. Yeah, it's a robotic relationship to simply be a citizen who does not see the power of their voice, to demand that those to whom they have given legitimacy by bequeathing them the right to be their leaders owe them accountability in the discharge of the mandate that has been given to them. we were not in any way going to let the government assume that it could do as it pleased. So we stood certain that the mandate of the government within the Constitution states that the primary purpose of government is to protect and to secure the lives and properties of citizens. So, by standing with the Chibok girls, we essentially were asking the government to rise up to its constitutional responsibility. The third thing we learned is that the politicization of human rights is a tragedy for any society. The shock for me was how the federal government refused to acknowledge the abduction of the girls for at least 3 weeks. When they finally did, it was with reluctance and with a lot of suspicion and doubt. And I never understood it. And then statements that said that those standing and calling for the rescue of these girls were politicking. That was strange. I thought, politicking? How can you politic about girls that terrorists took away from your society? What's political about terrorists abducting school children? Well, I later got to understand it. Apparently, our federal government felt that the girls were not really abducted, that what had happened was that it was an orchestrated scam by the state government where these girls were abducted from to embarrass the federal government. My goodness. Well, I decided when I recovered from the shock of that scenario to say, even if that were so, were the girls who are the victims also part of that orchestration? If they were not, by failing to rescue them, you victimized them a second time. Isn't that so? The nation state does not subject itself, where it concerns the lives of citizens, to any luxury of politicking with the lives of a single citizen. It has no right to do so. And so to mere the girls in the deep sea of the politics of contestation for power was a colossal abuse of the state. You denied your citizens rescue because you thought that they were taken to embarrass the state. An effective and functional and responsible nation state would first go after whoever took the girls and then come back to the issue of the motive for taking the girls. Are you following me? The fourth thing was also a form of abuse of the instrumentality of the nation state. As advocates for the Chibok girls, our determination to stay on the message for their rescue got a lot of traction globally. It was the global pressure that woke up our government to actually take steps at all. So what does that suggest? It suggests that you may be here in Canada, but you are equally very important for the girl, child, for the boy, for the man, for the woman in Afghanistan, in Pakistan, in Nigeria, wherever it may be, because we are global citizens. Our bond of shared humanity was activated through the advocacy for the Chibok girls. How many of you spoke about the girls? Can I just say, you ever spoke about the girls? Do you know these girls? Do you know them? No. Are you their relations? No. Why did you do so? Because you did that, if I may suggest, because you were expressing the aphorism that being a part of humankind, any time that that humanity is diminished, you also are diminished. Is that not so? A terror to one is a terror to all. And so it does not matter whether I know you or don't know you. It does not matter whether you speak my language or you don't speak my language. To the extent that we are human beings, I must dignify your right to life. And whenever I see that your right to life is being violated, it would be inhuman or inhumane for me to be silent. Why? Because silence empowers the oppressor against the victim. As I said, it's day 290 tomorrow by Canada time. The parents of these girls were full of hope like we were when we started. We did think that it wasn't going to be more than a few days after the government acknowledged and reluctantly began to move. It actually lost time after it acknowledged because it set up some committee to establish whether indeed. It took the committee completing its report and saying that in truth, 276 girls were abducted, 59 of them escaped on their own, and 219 are still missing, and verified their identities and identified also their parents. It took that for our government to finally admit that we had a case of massive abduction of young women from our soil. As anybody would know, in abduction cases, the first 48 hours matter. We lost that to the failure of the state. The unwillingness to protect the right of the weak and vulnerable cost us so much. By the time later in May, when our government engaged and governments of other countries, including Canada, offered help, we were excited and we saw hope. And we thought, oh, this is going to be great. These girls are going to be rescued. But it's day 290. The girls are not back. They are still with savages in the wild. And although we have not stopped, we have continued to be a voice, to advocate for them, to stand with their parents. The rest of the world has moved on, because many other issues have happened. Many who joined us in saying, "Bring back our girls," moved on. And then Charlie happened. And the whole world woke up and everybody decided to say, I am Charlie. Je suis Charlie. But the girls are not back. And we've not been told that the girls are dead. So whatever it was that made you feel that you needed to stand with these girls in the early days that you heard about their tragedy, must be reactivated. We can't have closure until there is closure. The parents of the girls have not given up. On the 1st of January, they engaged with the world, expressing their disappointment in the fact that there was nothing forthcoming in any tangible form of result for any of the actions that government had said it was taking. They made a call on the United Nations. It is the United Nations that exists for citizens when they feel that the nation state has failed them. And so when the citizens, being citizens of Nigeria, 219 of them, their parents feel that the government has not done the utmost to rescue their daughters, they are now taking their case to the United Nations. It's important that you should be a voice for them at this stage also. It's an escalation of responsibility. This world body is being called upon by these citizens that feel that they have been failed to take ownership of the tragedy that befell those families. Your voice is important at this stage for them. Whatever you did in the past and felt you contributed to the issue of these girls, you need to do it again and bring attention to the fact that the girls must be rescued. You're citizens of Canada. Canada is an important player in the global systems. Canada cherishes its role at the United Nations. As much as possible, prod your country to be a voice for the parents of the Chibok girls who are now calling on the United Nations to help in the rescue of their daughters. The second thing that the parents asked for is that anyone, anywhere in the world who can support them with private investigators to at least give them rudimentary information on where their girls are would be helpful. Just information. Where are these girls? They did not vanish into the air. They are somewhere. Private investigators can do some of this. And the parents asked for such support. When I speak to audiences like this, you never know who is in the audience. They need such support. The final thing is we as global citizens would have to realize that if we allowed the story of the Chibok girls to end without a concerted determination to solving it, we would lose our credibility in telling the girl child anywhere in the world that the best thing they can do is to get an education. We would have failed the girl child hugely if 219 of them that listened to us and agreed with us that education is the most effective tool for social and economic mobility. They had that. They agreed. They, by themselves, overcame many of the religious, social, cultural, political, and physical, financial barriers that normally would keep the girl child from the classroom. They overcame all of this. Listened to us, were persuaded by our argument as a community of people of the world. And they agreed to go in search of knowledge. And then what they got instead was abduction. If we move on without seeing the end of this as positively as possible, we lack the credibility to advocate for the education of the girl child anywhere in the world. Because any girl child that you say to in Borno State today to go to school, there's a look in their eyes saying, what if I'm taken? What would you do? Would it be silence like it has been concerning the Chibok girls? Are you forcing me to make a choice between going to school and staying alive? How can we make that the choice for young people in this generation? At a time when we know that the future progress of the world will continuously be determined by the quality of the human capital that the world can produce. and that education is the means by which you produce high-quality human capital. For those of you who care about poverty reduction in countries around the world, it is not by giving them aid that they achieve development. Development is not given. Development is owned. The ownership of development is established within the construct of education and human capital development. We can't not be connected to this problem. If we're in any way connected as people of the same planet, this is a symbol for us. And it is one that we must not be careless with. I tell you, I was looking at Jean-Jacques Rousseau, the social contract. Every man, having been born free and master of himself, no one else may, under any pretext whatever, subject him without his consent. To assert that the son of a slave is born a slave is to assert that he is not born a man. In respect of riches, no citizen shall ever be wealthy enough to buy another, and none poor enough to be forced to sell himself. The greatest enemies to freedom are the extremely rich and the extremely poor. Because one is willing to buy it while the other is willing to sell it. Our girls did not sell their freedom. It was taken from them. And all of us must be determined to get it back for them. Thank you very much.